Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the course of Survey of Major English-Speaking Countries. Today, we're going to learn Chapter 6, The Literature of Great Britain. This lecture is about Lesson A, William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare is universally regarded as the greatest dramatist and the finest poet of the English language. He lived in England during the era of the Queen Elizabeth I, of which historians consider the Elizabeth age as a peak of English culture. The exact birth date of William Shakespeare is unknown. However, based on the records of the parish register, he was baptized on April 26, 1564, in the Holy Trinity Church in Stratford-upon-Avon, and buried there on April 25, 1616. According to the custom at that time, infants were usually baptized 3 days after their birth, and Shakespeare's birthday is usually celebrated on April 23rd. So, also the date of his death. He died at the age of 52. William Shakespeare was the eldest son and the third of 8 children. His father, John Shakespeare, was a glover, a tanner, and a local prominent merchant who was later granted arms, acknowledged as a gentleman. Shakespeare's mother, Mary Auden, was left with money and some properties that her father gave her before his death. Therefore, Shakespeare grew up in a fairly well-off family. He was probably educated at the local grammar school in Stratford. He might have also learned Latin, Greek, and the language of ancient Rome there. William Shakespeare married Anne Hathaway in 1582, when she was 26 years old and pregnant. He was only 18. They had 3 children: Susanna, born in 1583, and the twins, a boy and a girl, Judith and Hamlet, born in 1585. Sadly, Hamlet didn't survive. He died at the young age of 11. Records show that Shakespeare apparently arrived in London and began his career as an actor around 1588. Within a few years, by 1592, he had attained success as an actor and a playwright. In 1594, he became a shareholder of his acting company, Lord Chamberlain's Man, later called the King's Man, for which he wrote many successful and popular plays. And in 1599, he became a partner in the Global Theatre and subsequently the Blackfriars Theatre. All these financially advantageous arrangements secured his financial success and enabled him to enjoy his large fortune during his lifetime. There are no complete or authoritative records on the life of William Shakespeare. We can only gather information on his life from public records such as tax registers, legal papers, or references to his work in various letters and diaries of his day. To a certain extent, his life is a puzzle to some scholars and critics. They have theorized that some of Shakespeare's works might have written by other authors, such as the philosopher and the politician Sir Francis Bacon, or the 17th Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, or the young and a genius Christopher Marlowe. These critics have the conjecture that the actor and the playwright William Shakespeare, who was given only an average education and was born a son of tradesmen, could not have been the brilliant author of the splendid work found in the first folio that was published in 1623. Shakespeare's early classical and Italianate comedies, containing tight double plots and precise comic sequences. A Midsummer Night's Dream is a witty mixture of romance, fairy magic, and comic low-life scenes. Shakespeare's next comedy, The Equally Romantic Merchant of Venice, contains a portrayal of vengeful Jewish moneylender Shylock, who reflects common views at that time, but may appear derogatory to modern audiences. His characters become more complex and tender as he switches deftly between comic and serious scenes, prose and poetry, and achieves a narrative variety of his mature work. This period begins and ends with two tragedies: Romeo and Juliet, the famous romantic tragedy of sexually charged adolescence, love, and death. In the early 17th century, Shakespeare wrote a number of his best-known tragedies. Many critics believe that Shakespeare's greatest tragedies represent the peak of his art. The hero of one of William Shakespeare's greatest tragedies, Hamlet, has probably been discussed more than any other Shakespearean character, especially for his famous lines, which begins, "To be or not to be, that is the question." Unlike the introverted Hamlet, whose fatal flaw is hesitation, the heroes of the tragedies that followed, Othello and King Lear, are undone by hasty errors of judgment. The plots of Shakespeare's tragedies often hinge on such fatal flaws or errors, which often overturn order and destroy the hero and those he loves. In Othello, the villain Iago manipulates Othello's sexual jealousy to the point where he murders the innocent wife who loves him. In King Lear, the old king commits the tragic error of giving up his powers, initiating the events which led to the torture and the blinding of the Earl of the Gloucester and the murder of Lear's youngest daughter. Shakespeare's first plays were written in the conventional style of the day. He wrote them in a stylized language that doesn't always spring naturally from the needs of the characters or the drama. The poetry depends on extended, sometimes elaborate metaphors, and the language is often rhetorical, written for actors to declaim rather than speak. After Hamlet, Shakespeare varied his poetic style further, particularly in the more emotional passages of the late tragedies. The experts described this style as more concentrated, rapid, varied, and in construction, less regular, not seldom twisted. In the last phase of his career, Shakespeare adopted many techniques to achieve these effects. These include irregular pauses and stops, and extreme variations in sentence structure and length. Shakespeare combined poetic genius with a practical sense of the theatre. Like all playwrights of the time, he dramatized stories from sources such as British history and European legends. He reshaped each plot to create several centers of the interests and to show as many sides of a narrative to the audience as possible. These strengths of design ensures that a Shakespeare play can survive translation, cutting, and wide interpretation without loss to its core drama. As Shakespeare's mastery grew, he gave his characters clearer and more varied motivations and distinctive pattern of speech. Documentation on the precise date of Shakespeare's play is lacking. None of his manuscript survived. Scholars and critics generally divide his dramatic career into three periods: the early period and the periods of comedies and histories, the period of tragedies, and the period of romances. Shakespeare achieved recognition and earned his reputation as a popular poet after he wrote his two long narrative poems, although these poems were not published until 1609. He wrote at least 37 plays and 154 sonnets. By 1612, he returned permanently to Stratford, partially retired there, and wrote his last play. In 1609, Shakespeare published his collection of 154 sonnets. Like his plays, the sonnets encompass many aspects of human experiences. Mortality is a strong theme, explored from the perspective of youth being encouraged to extend their lives to a future generation. Mortality is also examined as he writes about the lives of lovers growing old, death, and about the brief nature of existence. The sonnets are constructed of 14 lines, divided into three groups of 4 lines, called the quadrants, and a final group of 2 lines, called a couplet. Usually, the mood of the sonnet changes in the third quadrant as the writer expresses a realization or a sudden insight. All of the sonnets are written in iambic pentameter, and the final words in each line follows an A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F, G, G, rhyming scheme. To this day, any poem written in this pattern is known as Shakespearean sonnet. All in all, Shakespeare is not only the greatest, but also the most powerful and influential of English writers and poets. He is the master of early modern English. With his profound understanding of human nature and his ability to create such vivid and interesting characters, Shakespeare definitely has had a direct significant influence in the shaping of English literature and the development of English language. In the end, let's listen to and appreciate William Shakespeare's Sonnet 18.
Sonnet number 18 by William Shakespeare. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely, and more temperate. Rough winds do shake the darling buds of May, and summer's lease hath all too short a date. Sometime too hot the eye of heaven shines, and often is his gold complexion dimmed, and every fair from fair sometime declines, by chance or nature's changing course untrimmed. But thy eternal summer shall not fade, nor lose possession of that fair thou owest, nor shall death brag thou wanderest in his shade, where in eternal lines to time thou growest. So long as men can breathe, or eyes can see, so long lives this, and this gives life to thee.